All right. Well, welcome everyone to our new French Cinema Beyond Borders Roundtable. I'm Richard Newport. I teach movies at the University of Georgia, and my co-moderator today is Kelley Conway, a very good friend and colleague. She teaches film at the University of Wisconsin. I should also say she's a great expert on French film history and one of the top experts on Agnes Varda in the world as well. She's got a great book on Agnes. So this is a very special joint project Cinema Roundtable today, and it will be recorded so that we can distribute it further afterwards. It's sponsored by the Consulate General of France in Atlanta, the University of Georgia, and especially its Wilson Center for Humanities and Arts, as well as the University of Georgia Spotlight on the Arts, which is ongoing right now, and the Department of Theater and Film Studies, as well as UniFrance. I'll mention them more in a second. That's the French organization that promotes French cinema around the world. Now, we're also proud this year to be part of the France Atlanta 2021, which was created by the Consulate General of France in Atlanta and Georgia Tech in 2010. I taught at Georgia Tech for 6 years. It's an annual event series centered on innovation and designed to foster cooperation between France and the American Southeast. This year's edition is made possible in part through the support of the Honeybee Foundation, the Robert F. Shinazi and Family Foundation, Air France, TV5 Monde, Jade Fiducial, the French-American Chamber of Commerce in Atlanta as well. We invite you to visit their website, franceatlanta.org, which you can see above some of our heads, for their upcoming events. Now, the idea of this roundtable was initiated by Adeline Monzier of UniFrance and Pascale Bayard. Then she was cultural attaché for the French consulate in Atlanta. We selected 3 movies from their Young French Cinema series, all dealing, we decided, with characters and stories within and beyond France, and all by women directors, it turned out. Pascale has since returned, unfortunately, to France, and we welcome the new cultural attaché, David Ruffel, and thank him for all his help in organizing this today. We also want to welcome Nicolas Elliott. Nicolas, it will help with interpretation and make translations as needed today. It's good to work with you again, Nicolas. Merci et bienvenue. And we thank Dave Marr of the Wilson Center for helping arrange the event and for operating the webinar for us today. But most of all, we want to welcome our 3 directors and thank them for joining us to discuss these recent features. First of all, Keren Ben Rafael, who is joining us from Israel today. Chloé Mazlo, who is joining us from Montpellier, France today, and Nora Martirosyan, who is in Morocco today. And unfortunately, under her name, it also says Chloé Mazlo, so I will have to clarify at some points as we go. So congratulations on your beautiful and moving films. So again, as I mentioned, these are films about inside and outside France, the perceptions of Europe and outside of Europe as well. I'm going to introduce these very accomplished filmmakers. I could do long introductions, but because we have 3 people, we want to get to discussion. I've just got a short introduction of each one. Then I'm going to show a trailer for their film. And as soon as the 3rd trailer is done, then we will start talking about how they came to make these movies, these international films, if that's all right. So first, we'll start with, and we're kind of random order. And again, it's a casual event. We might interrupt each other as we go. Try to be like a round table in person. Keren Ben Rafael was born in Israel and studied philosophy and French literature at Tel Aviv University while working as a director and content editor for television documentaries. She graduated from the prestigious French school La Femis in the directing department. Her debut feature, Virgins, premiered at Tribeca in 2018. The End of Love is her 2nd feature film. It also showed at the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival, where I got to introduce it earlier this year. So your film, I'll just summarize it really quickly. A Coeur battant, The End of Love, tells the story of a woman and man who are separated in space. The woman's in Paris, the man in Israel. They must communicate via Skype. So let's begin by looking at the trailer. It just takes me a second here to share screen. And get this out of my way. And then I can pick End of Love, the trailer.
Mais quand reviendras-tu?
Ça va, je suis parti la semaine passée.
Au moins le sais-tu que tout le temps qui passe.
Je vais t'appeler tous les jours. Et ça va être comme si j'étais jamais parti. Le matin, je vais me réveiller avec vous. Et le soir, quand tu rentres du travail, je vais être avec vous. Je te promets.
Charles va vivre ici un petit peu parce que c'est plus pratique pour travailler.
Je suis parti depuis 2 semaines, elle a déjà trouvé le remplaçant. Hein.
Tu comprends plus ce que j'ai fait en France, honnêtement. C'est n'importe quoi.
Mais non, mais Yuval, tu veux pas remettre en question toutes les 2 semaines.
Allez, laisse.
Jette mes pulls, amuse-toi.
Tu veux pas l'entendre dire papa, ça t'intéresse pas?
Si, mais je... Laisse.
Tiens, t'as toujours pas eu ton visa? Ils savent que t'as une famille en France maintenant.
Il y a des petites cuillères.
Toi, tu le sais?
C'est quoi cet écran là? C'est de la merde. Moi j'ai besoin d'un vrai contact là, j'ai besoin que tu me désires vraiment.
Réponds pas ou quoi, papa?
Living all your troubles behind, singing loud, dancing wild, walking with goats and sheep, holding your hand.
All right. And stop share for a moment. Thank you. Again, trailers, I don't know how much control any filmmakers have over them, but all 3 of them are really stunning. Next, and again, in kind of random order, Nora Martirosyan grew up in Soviet Armenia, where she studied painting and contemporary art. Should the Wind Drop, Ciel, Tombe, is her first feature film. The film tells the story of a French engineer, Alain, played by Grégoire Collin, who must decide whether an airport is safe enough to open. The airport's located in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is situated in the contested area that you're going to hear about in the trailer. So I will play trailer number 2. Go back and forth a minute. Get this out of my way so I can see. Here we go. And I gotta make it big.
Paysage beautiful.
Chef de l'air, Chloé Mazlo, directeur de l'aéroport. Alors, comment vous trouvez notre petite cathédrale aéroportière?
Oh, I do something wrong. Sorry.
Northeast, Azerbaijan, enemy. Northwest, Armenia, Georgia, friendly.
Close your window. Close, close.
What's this?
Your setup doesn't allow for circling due to the proximity of the border?
No.
Alain, il faut que vous compreniez ce que représente cet aéroport pour notre pays. Dès que cet aéroport fonctionnera, la communauté internationale sera obligée de nous reconnaître.
Can you take me to the border?
Le Haut-Karabakh n'est pas sur vos cartes, mais le pays existe.
Ладно. Арти.
Sorry about that. And let me, actually, I will wait, I think, rather than go back and forth. Let me quickly introduce the third one. And Chloé Mazlo is French-Lebanese filmmaker based in Paris and Montpellier. After studying graphic design at Strasbourg, she specialized in animation. Her first feature, The Skies of Lebanon, Sous, ciel, Alice, which sounds much more poetic, uses both animated sequences and live action to tell a love story and family melodrama about a Swiss woman who falls in love with a Lebanese man. So the third trailer here is Skies of Lebanon.
Bienvenue au Liban. Puis-je vous orienter?
Attention, on nous a signalé la présence d'une Suisse dans le quartier. Bienvenue, Alice.
Enchanté.
Alice Delaloy, enchantée.
Vous comptez retourner vivre dans votre pays?
Je n'ai pas l'impression que ma place soit là-bas. Et vous, pas des rêves de voyage?
Je suis en train de travailler sur un projet de fusée. J'espère un jour envoyer le premier Libanais dans l'espace.
E comunque credo di non tornare a casa per un bel po'. Qu'est-ce qui se passe?
Je crains que plus rien ne soit comme avant dans ce pays que tu as tant aimé. Que notre paradis soit détruit.
On prend l'avion pour Paris ce mardi. Le pays n'existera sûrement plus dans une semaine.
C'est sûr que si personne n'a le courage de rester.
Il fallait s'y attendre. Ce 11e cessez-le-feu n'aura pas duré plus de quelques jours.
Elle est amoureuse.
Je vais rejoindre Salim. Je vais partir pour la France.
Alice,
Khalas.
est-ce que c'est parce que nous avons trop ri que nous n'avons pas eu le courage d'affronter nos larmes?
Je souhaite que toute la famille visite l'espace à bord de ta fusée.
All right. Just going to get me back. And there we are. Donc, merci again to all three of you for these really stunning, very different films, but again, they all engage with what is France, even when characters are outside of France. So I'd like to start with Keren, if that's fine, all right. To say, how did you come to make this story about, an international story, but about France and Israel?
Sure. Well, I'm Israeli, and as you said, from my short biography, I've studied in France, and when you go abroad to study, you don't really know where it's going to bring you. So I also got married to a French guy, and this became our lives, and meaning really, in a way, having our lives between these two countries, because we have families in two of the countries. And yeah, the idea for the film, which today seems obvious after the COVID period, because it's a couple with a baby that are communicating through Skype because they are in different countries. The idea, I mean, we made it before COVID. And the idea came from one period when we were separated like that, and our first daughter was a baby, and I guess I felt really strong how these moments of Skyping can be really intense, but can leave you so alone afterwards. I mean, the moment that you cut private, intimate, today we say Zoom, not Skype, but a conversation through video, the moment afterwards when you're suddenly alone, it's very strong, I think, this difference, you felt like you were with someone and then you're not. And this was what I was looking for in the beginning. This was what thrown me into this project in the beginning.
No, that's terrific. And in fact, yeah, one of the characters, it's Julie's mother, right, who says, oh, this technology, it's like you're there, but you're not. So it captures that sense. It's also, I just to point out to everybody, it's very ironic that so many filmmakers have been trying to figure out how do we make a movie during COVID and trying to figure out how to use Zoom and things. And you had already done this beforehand. So thank you. That's a perfect introduction to it. So I guess, Nora, we could go with you next. So Nora, yeah, can you tell us about your decision to make this film about Nagorno-Karabakh and how you came involved in that story? Get your microphone.
Hello.
It started from the first time I went to Nagorno-Karabakh in 2009. And when I discovered a country with all the attributes of the country, which means like roads and schools and gardens and parliament and president. And when I would look on the Google Earth, this country didn't exist. So I thought that the fiction of the existence of this country, it's so strong that there is only cinema that can make it even more poetic. So it was, yeah, from that on, I decided to make a film, and it took 11 years after the decision towards the realization.
Wow, that's impressive. All right, and could you just remind me, so the script then grew up sort of organically over time, or did you have it all worked out before this 11-year period?
No, it's, you know, the country was evaluating, and I was also growing myself because I wasn't really a filmmaker before. I made some short films, and I didn't know anything about the industry of the cinema. So I was just going back and forth to the country. And if in usual, like, let's say, traditional film, you write the script and then you go for the location scouting and try to find the places which will host the script. For me, it was the other way around. I went to the country every summer and I found the places, and I was trying to understand, because the spaces were important, and I was trying to understand what kind of narration can involve those important spaces. And the film is a lot about the space also.
That's true. Now we'll come back when we could talk about film style in a few minutes to talk and story to talk about it. It's just visually stunning as well. And then Chloé, could you say a little about your marvelous movie about Lebanon, and again how the decision to have a Swiss woman living in Lebanon, and sort of what your background with this is, you know, in terms of why make this movie at this point.
Et, ben, moi, je suis née en France de parents libanais. Et j'ai vraiment, depuis l'enfance, grandi avec l'histoire du Liban, autant sur le moment où c'était le paradis que les histoires autour de la guerre.
So I was born in France of Lebanese parents, and I really grew up from my earliest childhood with the history of Lebanon, both when it was paradise and with the stories of war.
Et quand j'ai voulu écrire sur le Liban, j'avais déjà fait mon premier court-métrage sur le même sujet, mais là je voulais entrer dans l'histoire différemment, et donc je me suis rapprochée du personnage de ma grand-mère qui est suisse et est allée s'installer au Liban dans les années 50.
So when I decided I wanted to write on Lebanon, at that point I'd already made my first short film on the same subject, but I decided that I wanted to enter into this history or this story differently. And so I focused on the character of my grandmother, who is Swiss and moved to Lebanon in the 1950s.
Okay. C'est tout? Okay. Bon, encore, we will speak about style and storytelling in a few minutes as well. Well, thank you very much. So it's a great way of introduction to the stories, and now Kelley will ask, we'll kind of go back and forth asking different sorts of questions. So Kelley, please.
Thank you so much, Richard. And thank you, all three filmmakers, for taking the time to talk with us today. This is a real treat for us. So I was struck by how all three of your films beautifully communicate the experience of being a foreigner and being native to a certain place. And in the case of the film, Should the Wind Drop, it's a question of the struggle for legitimacy as a nation. So I got to thinking, in this era of intensified migration, expanded globalization, and of course, political tensions of all kinds, your films seem very much of the moment, very, very contemporary. Can you speak about the importance of borders and nations, and maybe even national identity in these films, and perhaps the difficulty of belonging in these stories? Maybe we could start with Keren, whose characters are French and Israeli and are occupying very different existences.
Yes, I think in the case, in my film, you can feel that the need to be in another country, actually making yourself, how do you say, étranger, making yourself
Foreigner.
Foreigner in another country. It's also a need to maybe find something else about yourself. We can hear Yuval, the Israeli guy, speaking sometimes about the reason why he left. You can understand that stuff that he did before, like working as a photographer, but in like war areas and always being in the conflict. And you understand there is stuff that he couldn't live with in Israel. And so that France was a way, maybe a fantasy, which was for me as well when I came to France. So it was a way also to discover himself again, to be a foreigner and when we see the film, we understand that he finds himself once again in Israel, in his hometown and with his family and his friends. And suddenly all that disturbs him in France starts to, be felt stronger. And I think especially also things that he speaks about, not finding yourself, not having your family. This we all know as foreigners that can sometimes be hard, sometimes be good as well. But for him, he says something about being an Israeli in France, and then always an Israeli artist, and then always people waiting for his stuff to be political. And I think this is especially, maybe even more in France than in other countries, this kind of expectation of someone from Israel to bring a film that speaks about the conflict. And what happened when it don't? What do you even interest us if it doesn't speak about the conflict? And it's a question, I think, and I mean, my film doesn't speak about the conflict. So there is a place for this kind of films, even though it's a bit in the background. But yes, I guess it's something that I think about a lot, and it occupies my thoughts as well, so this is why it found its place in the script.
Thank you so much. Yes, there's this feeling in the film that Julie and Yuval want to be together, and they've planned to have this life in France together with their baby. But as time goes on, things change. He's resisting the idea of being in that box, that artistic box in France, where he's only, the political artist. And then he rediscovers the joy of being around his family and his friends in Israel. And he has this incredibly rich emotional life there. And we see that it's hard for him to make the move to return to France. And then, of course, conflict emerges. I just found that fascinating in your film. Let's turn to Nora now. Can you talk about, Nora, your film is absolutely about the concrete notion of borders and national identity. You're looking closely at a region situated between Azerbaijan and the Soviet Union, or Russia and Armenia, and it has and Georgia. It has a very complex status. And these people are actively fighting for, visibility on the international stage as a nation. Can you talk about the theme of borders and belonging in Should the Wind Drop?
Yeah, your question is really touching the heart of the project, which is how do you decide that it is a country? How do you decide the borders of this country, and how do you decide belonging to a place? So those decisions, I think, for the countries like, the European countries or United States, they didn't see war since quite certain decades, and I hope it will last. Those questions are not really relevant. Those questions they belong to the past of those countries. But the world and well, now we have a French Lebanese director with us. We have French Israeli directors with us. And in fact, the world is breathing with those questions, the questions of the borders and how do we draw those borders. So in the film, as the country didn't exist politically, administratively, doesn't have any juridical status, I had to draw this border visually without ever showing it. So all the film speaks about the border and the country which is content in this border. And inside of these borders, they are humans living, they are citizens living. And another question that was very important for me, you know, the film was shown in a human rights film festival. And I think it's also important to tell to ourselves that, you know, the human rights, something that we speak about so much. In fact, different humans, depending of the color of this passport, have different rights. And that's why my French protagonist, the auditor, international auditor of the airport, first, he has more rights as a human, and secondly, he thinks that he has more rights. So he thinks that he has the power to change things that all this population is not able to think. So it's like a complex question, and if I was a writer, I would write a book, but I'm a filmmaker, so I made a film, and I invite you to see it.
Well, we're very glad you took the time and trouble to make the film, because it's absolutely stunning, with gorgeous long shots and long takes of the landscape, and amazing and moving portraits of the people who live in this region and who are desperate for their situation to become stabilized. So thank you very much for that.
I'm sorry, and Kelley, I'm sorry to interrupt too, but can I, so Nora, so is it true then that your film has been nominated to move forward and represent Armenia, or like, I'm even curious about the its nationality. What is it? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, well, maybe we will be brought to speak about it, but the film is mainly produced in France. But when it was selected in Cannes Film Festival, in fact, they asked us, would we prefer it to go as a French film or as an Armenian? Because, well, I have Armenian nationality as well. And we went for the Armenian nationality for the film, because it's also a political gesture to speak about this political problem that politicians don't manage to speak about. And yes, the film is representing Armenia for Oscars 2022.
Congratulations. Okay.
And also, Nora, is it true that your film was shown at the Cannes Film Festival, the first Armenian film to be in competition at Cannes since 1965?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so yeah, we can understand the political impact of having that film travel through the world as an Armenian film, as well as a French film. Okay. Yeah, I found this film just so beautiful, and we can talk more about this in a bit, but how the main character is played by a very important actor called Grégoire Collin, whom many Americans will know from his work in the films of Claire Denis. But he's this French guy with so much power, right? He goes there, his decision can make this airport live or die. And then, of course, as the film progresses, things change, and he realizes that he has to find a way to exert a positive influence on this region, and maybe he's not able to, maybe he can't. It's very poignant. Okay, and finally, let's hear from Chloé Mazlo about Skies of Lebanon. So here we have the main character, Alice, who is a young Swiss woman who goes to Lebanon to work as a nanny, a child caregiver, and then falls in love with the Lebanese man. So she's a foreigner, but falls in love with this nation, this place also. And then when the Civil War begins, she doesn't want to leave. And so the whole film is about love and family, but also this extraordinary sense of belonging that she feels in Lebanon. Chloé, can you tell us a little bit about the story that you wanted to tell regarding borders and belonging and a sense of identity in certain places?
J'avais choisi le personnage d'Alice parce que elle fait partie de ces personnes qui sont nées dans le mauvais pays et qui vont renaître dans un autre pays, qui vont se sentir vivants quand ils vont découvrir un autre pays.
I had chosen the character of Alice because she's one of these people who was born in the wrong country and who's going to be reborn and feel alive when she finds the right country.
Et quand la guerre commence, elle sait que si elle part, elle va en quelque sorte mourir. Et elle préfère rester au Liban alors que c'est la guerre, parce qu'elle sait que si elle rentre en Europe, elle sait ce qui va se passer. Elle sait qu'elle va s'éteindre, et donc elle veut rester. Et ce personnage, il pourrait partir. Il a les moyens, il a le passeport pour rentrer, mais elle ne veut pas. Et donc, je trouvais ça intéressant de montrer une personne qui peut partir, mais qui veut rester.
When the war starts, she knows that if she leaves Lebanon, she will die. So she chooses to stay in Lebanon, despite the fact that there's a war, because she knows what will happen if she goes back to Europe. She knows that she'll fade away. So she wants to stay. She's a character who could leave. She has the passport necessary to leave, but she doesn't want to. So I thought it was interesting to choose a character that could leave, but makes the choice not to.
Et elle sait que quand les gens vont commencer à partir, ça va être la fin de quelque chose de merveilleux qu'elle avait construit dans ce pays d'adoption.
And she knows that when people start leaving, it will be the end of something marvelous that she had built in this adoptive country.
Et je trouve ça fascinant, l'amour qu'on peut avoir pour un pays, parce que c'est pas raisonnable, c'est pas rationnel, et c'est très dur d'en parler parce que c'est pas quelque chose qui peut s'expliquer pourquoi dans des endroits on se sent bien et pourquoi on n'aurait pas le droit d'y rester, pourquoi on n'aurait pas le droit de choisir le pays dans lequel on veut vivre.
I find it fascinating, this love that one can have for a country, because it's not reasonable or rational. And it's actually something hard to talk about because you can't explain why you feel good in a certain place. And you also can't explain why you can't stay there, why you can't choose to live there.
Et au Liban, elle était traitée comme une invitée, comme très bien accueillie, et elle savait qu'en allant en Suisse avec son mari libanais, il n'allait pas être aussi bien traité qu'elle.
In Lebanon, she was treated as a guest, a warmly welcomed guest, and she knew that if she returned to Switzerland with her Lebanese husband, he wouldn't be treated as well as she had been.
Et la séparation des familles au Liban est quelque chose de toujours actuel. Il y a énormément de familles qui sont séparées, des frères et sœurs qui sont dans des pays opposés. Et donc, c'est un sujet qui est encore très d'actualité.
And the separation of families in Lebanon is still a very current thing. There are many families that are separated, brothers and sisters who are living in countries that are opposed to each other. So this remains a very contemporary, current subject.
Yes, okay, thank you so much for that answer. And of course, the film also demonstrates or dramatizes that conflict between people within one family who have very different ideas about how to respond to a difficult situation. The daughter of Alice decides to leave for France at a certain moment. She can't tolerate life in Lebanon anymore. And so there's all this conflict within this small loving family about where to go, where to live. And then ultimately that conflict extends to the husband and the wife. And I won't give away, I don't want to spoil the film if people haven't seen it, but there's this very moving ending in terms of the status of this couple. So yeah, thank you so much, Chloe, for creating this such a beautiful narrative about the feeling of loving your adopted country and the paradoxical status of being foreign yet welcome, and then the change that can come in the subsequent years. So in the life of the family. Okay, over to you, Richard.
Okay, right. And I would also say it's such a whimsical movie in many places. It's so comical and so loving, even though it's dealing with like really tough issues. And it made me remember when I first started graduate school at Madison, one of my fellow graduate students was from Beirut. And in the middle of the semester, there was another outbreak and her parents' apartment got blown up. And she just said, how can I be sitting here studying movies in America when this is happening in Beirut? And she just left. And just went back home at a really tough time. So yeah, it's a really moving, it's a really important topic, and at the same time you do it with such humor in many places. It's really touching in lots of ways. We'll talk about that in a second. So what I'm interested now also is just your storytelling creative choices in terms of choosing style. Kelley already mentioned certain visual aspects, for example, of ciel, etc. So I was just going to ask each of you to say a little more about your creative choices in terms of its style, especially visual look and or sound, but also anything you want about sort of the plot structure, etc. So, for example, we'll start with Keren again, I guess. I mean, you could tell this story without always having to use Skype throughout. So it's a really daring and original kind of notion. And I mean, it's certainly, and one of the things just to know it, right, is it sets up the rhythm. In terms of we only get to hear people talk when they answer or sit and wait. So it's a very unusual thing, but it's also a stylistically challenging, I would think. How do you work in depth and movement and things like that with people staring at a computer screen? So I was just wondering if you'd say something about the visual style and the challenges you had, and did you know from the beginning that you were just going to have it primarily looking through the Skype camera?
Yeah, actually this idea came with the idea of the film. I think it was very intuitive, and I felt I want to be inside, from a look from an inside, a little bit like as if we would have found materials of this couple speaking that they recorded themselves from their Zoom or Skype meetings. And it's true that usually in a film, we will always have another point of view, like a camera that will film from outside, how I'm looking at the computer and speaking with you, and you will have a few ways to cut a scene in the editing. And here it's true that it's something a bit different, this idea to really use only this, and having this idea from the beginning already when we were writing the script was also pushed us, like me and Elise, with who I wrote the script, to, you need to show so many things that you can't. You need to tell a lot of things. You want to tell a lot of things about the characters, their lives, to give you the feelings of their family or the people around, their work, a lot of things. And you can't really, I mean, you're really restricted. And for me, in this case, I think it was a present in a way, like really, because the more I restrict myself, it's easier for me to write. And I guess to direct as well. Nora said before that it took her 11 years. My first feature film, it took me around 6-7 years, which is not bad as well, I think. Whereas this film, also because it participated in a special program by the Biennale of Venice, and it was the challenge itself, we had to do it in less than a year to be ready for the next Venice Film Festival a year after we started, even less than a year. And we wrote the script very, very fast. So I don't think the fact that I knew exactly the way I'm going to film this and that I know Skype so well from the inside, from having had so many conversations with my family, with my kids when I'm not there, with my parents. All of this made the writing to be like really with this arrow, you know, it like I knew where it has to go in terms of how to intensify scenes and make you enter in this scene and understand the characters, even though you can't show, you're really restricted.
Yeah, we have to fill in a lot of gaps. I'm just really curious about how you shot it. So if you've got Julie talking, I mean, is the other actor there? Are they all completely, so, you know, did it take the actors a while to get used to having a camera right that close to them at all times?
Yeah, so it was, we hesitated for a while how exactly to do it. And what we finally did was having the few first shooting days, we shot in the French apartment. We did the Israeli room of Yuval. So only this room where he does have quite a few scenes were shot in the French apartment. And then what we did in this scene is that we had two cameras and kind of a system that imitates Skype in a way, because each one had an earring, how do you say, they can hear each other. And they had a very small screen. And so they were reacting almost like in a video call, and I could watch both of them. Later on in the other scenes, sometimes we had maybe 2 more days that we had the actor with us and he could give her the lines. But in other scenes, sometimes I put playbacks for them and sometimes there was nothing. And it really depended on what the scene needed. If the scene, if I felt like the actors, it will do them good to have the presence of the other actor or of a playback. And I have to say that it's also so strange for the actors. They don't know this. They're not used to, of course, they're used to giving the lines because they're used to having like 2 shots that they're not with their fellow actor, but they're not used to play in front of playback, for example. And it can bring really interesting stuff. And I think it was amusing as well for them.
Oh, that's terrific. No, and it leads to some very embarrassing moments and some very funny moments. My favorite is Romeo. I mean, when the clueless babysitter Romeo gets stuck in a long conversation with the angst of Yuval, I thought it was terrific. But Kelley had a different favorite scene, I know, and then we'll move on.
Oh yeah, my favorite scene in this film is that extraordinary moment when Keren, you use the constraints, the restriction, as you say, of this apparatus that you've established to create extraordinary suspense. And this is that moment when one of the characters has left the frame and we need and want to see the baby. We need to know that that baby is safe. And the baby's father, Yuval, is losing his mind with anxiety, also needing to know that that baby is safe. And the characters in the film and your viewers are caught up in this moment of restriction and constraint and frustration. Is this baby going to be safe? We don't know. We just don't know. We can't see what we want to see. Very effective.
Yeah, we can see that open window. Anyway, no, it's a great device that doesn't become because you move the camera so many with people carrying it. It opens up the film in ways, and using mirrors, it's terrific.
But you know, before you said you were speaking about borders. And when I was working on the film in the script, but also while doing it, I always spoke about the Skype, about the screen as a border, is like a wall, I would say, because it's like something that you can, you feel like you can pass, but it's always stuck there. You cannot pass it. And it's the same in this scene. Of course, it comes to the extreme.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Brilliant.
We'll move on to Nora, and just the visual look of your film is stunning. I just remind me, like, where did you find that building? Like, what is that airport where you found it? But could you say something about your choice of the filming with those beautiful shots of this lovely place, etc. But there's always this tension in the background, and you've got a main character who just kind of wanders. He's just got to just checking stuff out. He watches the little boy. He jumps through the fence. So you could just say a little about your visual style in terms of pacing and what the storytelling and how it worked with your visual style.
Yeah, Gilles Deleuze, the French philosopher that speaks a lot about moving image, when he was making one of his conferences in this French cinema school, La Fémis, he started telling that to make cinema, you need to have ideas in cinema. It's not just having ideas. To make philosophy, you need to have ideas in philosophy. So in fact, my idea of cinema in this film was, first of all, the country doesn't exist. Juridically, it is not on Google Earth. So I should draw it. So the film should draw a country, first of all. So how do you draw a country? You cannot draw it as a tourist, because tourist goes somewhere to the places that exist. This place doesn't exist in the mind of international community. So what is the country made of? The fields, the roads, the cities, this airport. So this is the first thing. And the country that I was trying to draw with the film, it looks like paradise, but it is built on the top of a volcano. So at any moment, the volcano can erupt. And visually, you cannot see it. So the question is how this fear, how this anxiety can be translated. And that's why I thought about the music that is in the film and that shows this boiling heart of the country that I was trying to draw with the film. So the visual choices come from this conception, and also from the fact that, as we never saw, I had to show and the cities and the villages and to showing this all, trying to avoid the border till the moment when it erupts.
Yeah. No, and it's stuff, and it's also got the great little boy who he can wander anywhere. I mean, he doesn't see borders even of the airport, right? He seems to go everywhere. But it's also got that irony about water. He sells water to people, but then other kids can throw water at people. I mean, the water's a great great motif running through it. So no, that's terrific. And then with Chloé, again, it's a stunning movie, and you've got that flashback structure. So it's bouclé, right? With her writing on the boat at the beginning and the end. So I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you decided what could be animated, how you decided whether to put that, I call it guerrilla theater, with the cedar woman in her green outfit, little scenes that come in to sort of represent what's going on outside, and then just this very stylized, stunning world that you've got Alice walking through. So a little about your choices in visual style and how you decided, what this should look like when, as you tell the story. So,
comme il y a le flashback m'a permis, et j'avais très envie d'être justement dans quelque chose de pas naturaliste. C'est-à-dire que le flashback annonce qu'on est dans les souvenirs du personnage d'Alice et qu'on n'est pas dans la réalité, dans quelque chose de naturaliste. C'est une vision de la guerre au Liban et du Liban par cette femme à un moment donné.
Well, the flashback allowed me and also gave me something that I really wanted, which was to avoid naturalism. The flashback announces that we're in this character Alice's memory and not in reality, not in something naturalist. What we're seeing is a vision of this woman, that this woman has, of the country and the war at a specific moment.
Et pour en fait, c'est dès l'écriture, j'avais choisi quelle partie allait être animée et quelle partie non. En fait, par exemple, la partie en Suisse qui est en maquette, Je voulais la faire en animation parce que ça racontait aussi que la Suisse était un pays un peu rigide, un peu comme ça coincé, et que pour que quand Alice arrive au Liban, on soit dans quelque chose de beaucoup plus joyeux et coloré et vivant.
So I chose which parts of the film would be animated and which would not from the writing stage. And for instance, the fact that the part in Switzerland is done with models, that it's animated, that showed for me that it's a slightly rigid, uptight country. And therefore, when Alice gets to Lebanon, the fact that we go to live action allows us to feel it. It's a joyous, lively, colorful place.
Et pour l'arrivée au Liban, par exemple, les cartes postales, c'était parce que pour moi, quand on arrive dans un pays, on est dans la carte postale, on idéalise beaucoup, on reste en surface. Et Alice, en arrivant, elle est dans cette euphorie de l'arrivée et elle est accueillie par cette hôtesse de l'air déguisée en cèdre qui rajoute à cette énergie qu'on peut ressentir quand on arrive au Liban. En tout cas, c'est ce que ma grand-mère me racontait, comment elle avait été complètement enveloppée par, par les couleurs, par les bruits, l'ambiance.
So for the sequence of the arrival in Lebanon, the reason that I use postcards there is to get that feeling that you have when you arrive in a country at first, that you're in a postcard. You know, you tend to idealize the place, you tend to stay on the surface. And for the character of Alice, it really conveys that euphoria of arriving. And she's welcomed by this airline stewardess who's dressed up as a cedar. And that really conveys that energy that you can feel when you arrive in Lebanon. In any case, it's what my grandmother told me about when she arrived in Lebanon. She really felt enveloped in the colors, the sounds, the atmosphere of the place.
Et la mise en scène stylisée m'a aussi permis d'être un peu décalée avec la réalité et de ne pas montrer la guerre de façon frontale. Et c'était quelque chose de très important pour moi parce que c'est comme ça que ma famille me l'avait raconté. Jamais ils n'avaient voulu abîmer l'image du Liban, il fallait toujours un décalage. Et donc j'ai voulu que ce décalage soit visible dans la mise en scène.
And the stylized direction, the stylized mise en scène allowed me to have a slightly offbeat, off-center view of reality. And that was very important for me to not show the war head on, frontally. And the reason that was important for me is that that's how my family told me things. My family never wanted to damage the vision of Lebanon. So it was really important to keep this off-center kind of quirky approach.
Oh, that's great. No, and in fact, it works so well. C'est Mimi, n'est-ce pas? She goes to see the wall, to the photo of Tony qui a disparu. So Tony's disappeared, they've got a picture on the wall, and she just sort of merges through the wall with him. He comes alive and things like that. In other places, she has to literally cut the roots off her leg from her parents from Switzerland. So in all these movies, I think, yeah, Europe, whether we see it in, should the wind drop or not, Europe stands for something that's both for her certainly for Chloe's characters, like a failure. Oh, don't go to France, don't go to Switzerland, you know, stay here. And for others, it's a sort of secure place. But I think in all these films, the notions of what is France, what is Europe, versus what is Israel, what is Lebanon, what is Nagorno-Karabakh, all that is really, really significant. And there, again, one of the things I judge movies on is would I teach them? And I would teach all three of these movies for very different reasons. They're all really stunning. But we'd like to talk forever, but Kelley, I guess we should maybe wrap up with just sort of their opinions of
Yeah, well, let me just add
Cinema today?
one last thought on the issue of style in all three of these films. I was so impressed with the huge diversity of strategies that all three filmmakers are using and are completely in control of. I mean, Nora is using at certain moments. Nora's film "Should the Wind Drop" reminded me of films by Abbas Kiarostami, the renowned Iranian director. You know, and also with references to Italian neorealism in the character of the little boy, who's shot with so much tenderness, but also with a kind of interesting distance also. And then Chloe's extraordinary mix of animation and live action, and then different ways of stylizing live action was to represent different points of view on this world that she's constructed. I found that so
and
refreshing.
And the irony of having the guy who's trying to make the rocket because he wants to put the first Lebanese person on the moon. You know, they're working on rockets and then they get blown up by a missile from it's an amazing
Exactly. And then lastly, the Skype film, Keren's film, shot through this apparatus of Zoom, that too is just extraordinarily prescient about you know, our world through COVID and beyond. So congratulations to all of you for this extraordinary capacity that you have to develop your own style that works so perfectly with the stories that you're trying to tell. So Richard and I would like to conclude today with some words about the state of French cinema. All the while knowing that French cinema is not just French, it's Israeli, it's you know, it's a hyphenate, multiple hyphenates. Co-productions are the norm now. Globalization, you know, is the framework for our world now. So French cinema has traditionally made room for all kinds of films, low budget films that you would characterize as art et essai, art house cinema. Genre films, you know, France still makes an enormous number of comedies, for example, and then big budget action films or heritage films. All of these films are possible and are being made every year in France. Can you share your perception about what it feels like to be a filmmaker in France today? What are the possibilities and the constraints or the difficulties in financing your projects, in shooting your films, in getting distribution for them? Thank you. Should we start with Keren?
Who wants to start? Yeah, Keren, you say? Okay. Yeah, Keren, can you say something?
Make Keren start.
Making movies today, how does it look?
No, I would just say that I feel that in France, I feel like France is my home of cinema, much more than in Israel, even though for the past few years I've been more in Israel, and my first feature film was done, is more Israeli. It's co-production, but it's an Israeli film. I feel like it's really my home for cinema because I think France accepts foreigners and wants to see films. Sometimes there are films that you can see only in France. And I think this is amazing. And it gives a house and a possibility to create for so many foreigners from different countries where they can't have the funding to make their films if they didn't have the back of France. And I also think something else is that I think French really like, from the one hand, to feel that they are giving place for these countries, films, cultures. And on the other hand, I think they like to see how we foreigners look at them from outside. And I think they like it. You know, in my film, there is this French mother, which is a bit, you know, when you compare to the Israeli mothers, so much more loving and caring. And they love to see this, you know, there is something about the way how we can criticize a bit, you know, maybe not much, but criticize them. I think they like it. And I think it's also a part of why they participate in these films so much, you know.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Who would like to speak about what it feels like to be a filmmaker in France today next? Chloé?
Ouais, je pense que c'est un des meilleurs endroits au monde pour être réalisateur en ce moment. Ouais.
I think it's one of the best places in the world to be a film director at the moment.
Mais parce que, par exemple, nous, on a fait le film, réalisé le film qu'avec de l'argent français. C'était impossible d'avoir de l'argent libanais parce que c'est la crise totale. Et je pense que le cinéma français est ouvert à des formes différentes. Voilà, il y a des systèmes qui sont quand même de financement qui sont quand même bien faits, même si tout n'est pas parfait évidemment. Mais voilà, je pense qu'il y a de la place pour les cinémas d'auteur. C'est quand même rare et précieux.
Because, for instance, we made our film exclusively with French money. It was impossible to have Lebanese money because it's a total crisis there. So French film is open to different forms. There are well-made financing systems. Of course, everything is not perfect, but there's room there for auteur cinema, which I think is a very precious thing.
Et il faut juste faire attention parfois pour reparler de la notion d'étranger, d'émigration, tout ça, il y a les films où on sait que ça fait plaisir aux Français et il y a, par exemple, pour mon film, parfois on me disait mais c'est pas ce qu'on attend d'un film libanais. Et donc voilà, c'est de pas aller vers ce qu'on attend quand on vient d'un certain pays, on attend une certaine chose de vous, un certain style, un certain ton. Et parfois, il faut un peu tenir pour aller contre ça.
Like Yuval and his photos.
So one just has to be careful to return to this notion of the foreigner and immigration. One just has to be careful because there are some films that you can tell are made to please the French. So for example, with my film, some people would tell me, this is not what we expect from a Lebanese film. So you have to make this effort to not go for what one expects for a film from a certain country, a certain tone, a certain style. It's good to go against those kind of expectations.
Okay, that's terrific.
Right, and I totally understand that, and you succeeded at that in constantly surprising the viewer with the choices that you made. Let's hear from you, Nora, about what it feels like to be a filmmaker in France right this moment today. What are the possibilities? What are the constraints?
I think it's interesting also for the American auditor to understand how the cinema system is financed in France, because in fact, there is this cinema fund that gets €1 from each sold tickets from every American blockbuster. So French cinema is partly and mainly financed by the success of American cinema in the movies. So when this money gets to the government, how is it shared? It is exact what says Chloé, and I completely agree with her. I think France is a country where it's more easy to make cinema than anywhere else. That's what I strongly believe. And there are possibilities for films in the foreign languages. For example, for my film, I thought that I won't be able to apply for this big French cinema fund because the film is not speaking 50% of French language. But in fact, the rule is different. It's not 50%, but French should be majority. And as my film speaks 5 languages, it was possible to make like 20% or 25% of French language. So in fact, there are really plenty of possibilities, but and I think it's less maybe money and success oriented, because there is a possibility to make small films with small budget and not many entries. And At the same time, I think the difficulty in France is, as everywhere else, like the script is the king. So it's the script that decides if the film will be financed or not, though we know that there are many beautiful films in the history which were made with no scripts, but this is not possible anymore.
No,
that's a good insight. Yeah. So French cinema, you're saying privilege is a kind of a well-planned cinema based on a completed screenplay as opposed to something more improvisational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just want to remind everybody who might not know it that when we looked for films, it wasn't tough to say, oh, we should go look for women filmmakers. France has more women filmmakers, I believe right now, than any other nation in the world. It's always one or two. So there's a lot of encouragement for first filmmakers from that fund, from the CNC that Nora mentioned. Some people say it's easier to get your first film made in France than your second sometimes because there are different pots of money. So it is really encouraging to hear the three of you, see your very different movies, and introduce them to our audiences. There are a couple of questions, I believe, but we don't have much time. But certainly somebody mentioned even and asked about whether the nations seem like metaphors, I believe, in all the films, and there's much allegorical and metaphorical in all three of these films. But I think we need to wrap up, right, Kelley?
I think so, yeah. Unless perhaps each of the filmmakers would like to say a word or two about their next project. I hope you're all working on your next film.
So does anybody want to say what you're doing next? Some of these are maybe...
I can start. I discovered that making film is like a drug, and you are getting addicted to it. And this moment of the amazing moment when you feel yourself so strong, stronger than anyone, you want to live it once again. What happened with my film, in fact, the territory that I was trying to speak about, the country that I was speak about, when the film was made, when it was done, when it was selected in Cannes, a few months later, severe war started in this country, and the geography, the borders that we mentioned, they have changed, and and it was also very complicated to carry the film during all this time because the geography was changing and people were dying, and this war finished with the defeat of Armenia. Very unjust and very sad political decisions were made, and Should the Wind Fall was a film of love to this country, and now my heart is full with anger, so the next film will be a film of anger and injustice.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Yes, maybe it wasn't clear to our viewers today, but the region that your film is about exploded in violence shortly after you completed your film. So a film that started out as one kind of story, became very, very much caught up in contemporary events and in a heartbreaking fashion. So, okay, other filmmakers, can you tell us about your next project?
Chloé, vas-y.
Moi, je suis en train d'écrire pareil, je suis devenue addict maintenant. Je veux faire un autre film et j'écris un film. C'est une histoire d'aventure avec des enfants. C'est beaucoup sur la fratrie, sur l'union qu'on peut avoir entre frères et sœurs.
So I'm the same. I've become an addict. I want to make another film. And so I'm writing an adventure story with children at the moment, an adventure story about children. It's a lot about siblings, the feeling of unity, of union that one can have between brothers and sisters.
That sounds compelling. Keren, what is your next project?
I'm making children instead of making a film about children, because this is the third one. So.
Oh, and
I have a few projects in writing, but I'm not sure I feel like getting into it too much. So.
Okay, we understand. And we're all just in love with that baby right now. So.
Well, we should wrap up. I just really want to thank everybody, surtout les trois réalisatrices, for taking this time to visit with us. Again, it will be recorded, and we'll make sure this is available to a wider audience as well. So really, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate Nicolas in New York. You are in New York today, right? Nicolas in New York, Kelley in Madison, Wisconsin. And again, thanks very much to the Wilson Center and to France Atlanta as well. So thank you very much. Keep in touch, the three of you, and we really appreciate you doing this. So have a great evening for the three of you over there, and a good day for the rest of us. All right. Thanks, Kelley.